The fire burned with an intensity that seemed to consume not just the wood and branches beneath it, but the very air around it. The smoke curled into the emerald canopy, dissipating into the humid night like ghostly tendrils. Jonathan Vega's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched in the alien undergrowth, the dense foliage pressing against his bare torso. His vibra machete felt warm in his hand. The subtle hum of its energized blade a comforting reminder that he wasn't completely helpless here. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes, but he didn't dare move. Every breath felt labored, the jungle's oppressive heat clawing at his lungs. He trained for this kind of environment during his years in the Terran Special Forces, but Naram was something else. It was alive in ways that Earth's jungles weren't. The trees seemed to pulse faintly with bioluminescent veins, their sprawling roots emitting soft chimes when touched. The air carried the faint scent of metallic decay, a constant reminder that this place didn't welcome him. The scream shattered the night again. It was raw, unfiltered terror, and it sliced through Jonathan's thoughts like a blade. Every muscle in his body tensed. The scream was unmistakably human, or close enough that it didn't matter. He couldn't ignore it. Jonathan crept forward, parting the foliage carefully to avoid making noise. The jungle thinned ahead, revealing a clearing bathed in the flickering orange glow of firelight. What he saw froze him in place. A humanoid girl, her lavender skin glistening with sweat and soot, was bound to a crude spit suspended over the flames. Her wrists and ankles were tied with twisted vines, and her long silver hair dangled precariously close to the fire. Her flight suit, tattered and burned, clung to her slender frame, parts of it cut away by her captors. Her captors. They surrounded the fire, 7 of them, tall and insectoid with mottled green and brown skin that shifted patterns like liquid camouflage. Their elongated heads, adorned with jagged bony crests, housed 4 unblinking eyes that glowed faintly in the firelight. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, their gangly limbs making faint clicking sounds as they shifted. Jonathan recognized them from his briefings. The Krell. Primitive, yes, but not to be underestimated. Their weapons, knives and spears made of bone and stone, were rudimentary but deadly. And their intelligence. Jonathan had read reports of them salvaging advanced technology from crash sites and using it to devastating effect. The girl twisted on the spit, her amber eyes locking onto Jonathan's through the flames. Her expression shifted from fear to something else, desperate hope. She opened her mouth as if to scream again, but the sound caught in her throat. Jonathan ducked back into the shadows, his mind racing. This wasn't his mission. He was here to conduct a solo reconnaissance of Naram's mineral resources, not play hero in some alien drama. The Interstellar Trade Commission was paying him handsomely to locate deposits of rhodium, not rescue damsels in distress. He gripped his vibra machete tighter, his knuckles whitening. Walking away was the smart move. His ship, the Nomad, was less than a kilometer away, loaded with enough medical supplies to save hundreds of lives at the Sentu outpost. Supplies that the Krell would definitely want if they caught wind of them. Another scream, this one weaker, broke his train of thought. Damn it, he muttered. Jonathan assessed the situation. 7 Krell, all armed. The girl was in no condition to run, and any attempt to fight them head-on would almost certainly get her killed in the crossfire. His gaze flicked to his pack. The vaccines. A plan began to form, risky but his best shot. Jonathan took a deep breath, stepping into the clearing. The Krell turned toward him immediately, their chittering conversation halting. Their 4 eyes glinted in the firelight, reflecting something primal and predatory. Easy there, Jonathan said, raising one hand in a gesture of peace while keeping his machete visible in the other. His voice was calm, but every nerve in his body screamed at him to run. I come in peace. And all that crap. The Krell leader stepped forward, its crest flaring slightly. It was taller than the others, its mottled skin shifting into more aggressive patterns. Jonathan held his ground, gesturing toward the girl and then to his pack. Trade, he said firmly. He unslung the pack and pulled out the case of vaccines, holding it up like an offering. Medicine. You understand? Medicine for her. The Krell leader tilted its head, its mandibles clicking as it studied him. It hissed something to its companions, and two of them moved toward the spit. Jonathan's muscles coiled, ready to act if this went sideways. The Krell cut the girl down, her body limp as they dragged her by her hair toward him. Jonathan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He placed the case of vaccines on the ground and slid it toward the leader. The Krell leader opened the case, its 4 eyes blinking in sequence as it examined the contents. After a tense moment, it clicked approvingly and motioned for Jonathan to take the girl. He didn't hesitate. Jonathan scooped her up into his arms, her weight barely registering. Her lavender skin was cool to the touch despite the burns marring her arms, and her breathing was shallow but steady. "Got you," he muttered under his breath, retreating into the jungle. The Krell didn't follow. Jonathan moved quickly, his senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves and distant chirp felt like a potential threat. The girl stirred weakly in his arms, her amber eyes fluttering open. "Safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. Her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, human." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was melodic, almost musical, with a faint lilt that hinted at her alien origins. "I'm Jonathan," he said. "Jonathan Vega." She blinked slowly, her gaze focusing on him. "I am Vera Kixes, of Australese." Australese. Jonathan's mind raced. The Australese were a highly advanced civilization, known for their diplomacy and strict adherence to neutrality. If she was Australese, her presence here raised more questions than answers. "We'll talk later," he said, his grip tightening around her. "First, let's get you to my ship." The jungle closed in around them, the bioluminescent trees casting faint blue and green glows. Jonathan's legs burned as he pushed through the undergrowth, his focus entirely on reaching the Nomad. When the ship finally came into view, a wave of relief washed over him. The compact exploration vessel sat in the clearing like a beacon of safety, its matte gray hull illuminated by the faint glow of Narum's twin moons. Jonathan carried Vera up the ramp, sealing the hatch behind them. The ship's sterile interior felt like stepping into another world. He set her down gently in the co-pilot's chair, her silver hair spilling over her shoulders like liquid metal. "You'll be okay," he said, retrieving the medkit. Vera's amber eyes met his, a faint smile curving her lips. "I owe you my life, Jonathan Vega." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. They were exactly as they had been in the dream. As he applied the cooling gel to her burns, the question gnawed at the edge of his mind. Was this fate? Or something else entirely? The interior of the Nomad hummed softly, the ship's systems waking up as Jonathan Vega sealed the entry hatch. The girl, Vera Kixes, was slumped in the co-pilot's chair, her lavender skin glistening with sweat and her silver hair tangled in disarray. Despite her weakened state, her amber eyes never left him. They carried an intensity that unnerved Jonathan. Not fear, not gratitude, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. "You're safe now," Jonathan said, his voice low as he moved to the medkit stored in the ship's compact medical alcove. He rummaged through its contents, pulling out burn gel, sterile wipes, and bandages. "I owe you my life," Vera murmured again, her voice melodic but faint. Jonathan glanced over his shoulder. "You said that already. Let's focus on getting you patched up before you start writing thank you notes." Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of resilience, and Jonathan took it as a good sign. He knelt beside her, setting the medkit on the floor. "This might sting a little," he warned as he applied the burn gel to the angry red marks on her arms. Her body stiffened slightly, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes remained locked on his face, studying him intently. "You are not like others of your kind," Vera said softly, her voice steady despite the pain. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, not looking up from his work. "You've met a lot of humans, have you? Enough to know that many would not risk themselves for an alien they'd never met," she replied. "Especially not on a planet as dangerous as Narum." Jonathan shrugged, wrapping a bandage around her wrist. "I didn't exactly have time to weigh the pros and cons. You screamed, I acted." Simple as that. Her gaze lingered on him, unblinking. You acted with instinct and honor. Those traits are rare. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. He wasn't used to being praised for doing what he considered the bare minimum. Well, maybe your people haven't met the right humans. Vera tilted her head, her silver hair cascading over her shoulder. Perhaps. Or perhaps you are the exception. Jonathan chose not to respond, focusing instead on finishing her treatment. He worked methodically, cleaning and dressing the burns on her wrists and ankles before moving to the smaller abrasions on her legs. The silence between them grew heavier, filled only by the hum of the ship's systems and the soft rustle of bandages. Finally, he sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his pants. That's the best I can do for now. You'll need proper medical attention when we reach a station. Vera nodded, her posture relaxing slightly as the immediate pain subsided. Thank you, Jonathan Vega. Jonathan stood and returned the medkit to its compartment. You're welcome. Now, why don't you tell me how you ended up on a spit in the middle of nowhere? Vera hesitated, her expression darkening. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tracing the edge of the armrest. I was part of an exploratory delegation, she began. Australis has been mapping this sector for potential trade routes and cultural exchanges. My team and I were sent to Narum to establish first contact with the Krell. Jonathan leaned against the bulkhead, crossing his arms. The Krell? You mean the primitives back there with the spears? Vera's amber eyes flicked to his, sharp and unwavering. They may appear primitive, but they are far more complex than they seem. Despite their rudimentary technology, they possess a sophisticated social structure and an innate ability to adapt to new environments. They've even been observed salvaging and repurposing advanced technology from wreckage they've found. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Didn't look too sophisticated when they were about to cook you alive. Her expression tightened, a flicker of shame crossing her face. Something changed, she admitted. Our initial interactions were peaceful. We had established basic communication protocols and were beginning to exchange cultural information. But then, without warning, their behavior became hostile. Jonathan frowned. Hostile how? Vera's hands clenched into fists on her lap. They attacked us. Disabled our shuttle. My team scattered, and I ordered them to flee while I stayed behind to negotiate. I believed I could reason with them, but I underestimated their aggression. Jonathan studied her, his instincts telling him there was more to the story. What do you think triggered it? Vera shook her head, her silver hair swaying. I don't know. One moment we were sharing information about our respective worlds, and the next, they were treating us as enemies or prey. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a low whistle. Hell of a first contact. Did any of your team make it out? Her expression darkened further. I don't know. If they did, they would have sent a distress signal to Australis. My people might already be en route to Narum. Jonathan pushed off the bulkhead and moved to the cockpit, his fingers flying over the navigation console. If that's the case, we need to get out of here. Last thing I need is a standoff with your people. Vera rose unsteadily from her seat, leaning against the console for support. A standoff. Jonathan glanced at her. You said it yourself. Relations between Australis and Earth aren't exactly friendly right now. If your people show up and find a human ship here, it could get messy. Her amber eyes softened, her gaze steady. I would vouch for you. You saved my life. That carries weight, even in the current political climate. Jonathan smirked, though there was no humor in it. Yeah, because politicians are known for their gratitude. Before Vera could respond, the ship's alarm blared, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. What the hell? Jonathan muttered, his hands darting to the controls. Vera steadied herself, her expression suddenly sharp. What is it? Proximity alert, Jonathan said, his voice clipped. Something's out there. The two of them moved in unison, Vera sliding into the co-pilot's chair as Jonathan brought up the external cameras. The screen filled with the image of a Krell hunting party, their gangly forms moving through the jungle toward the clearing where the Nomad was parked. "They're coming for us," Vera said, her voice steady but laced with tension. Jonathan cursed under his breath. Guess they didn't appreciate our trade. He powered up the ship's engines, the low hum vibrating through the deck. "We're leaving. Now." The Nomad lifted off the ground, the clearing below shrinking as they ascended into the sky. Jonathan's hands moved with practiced precision, guiding the ship through Narum's dense atmosphere. The turbulence was rough, but he kept the vessel steady, his focus unyielding. Vera gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time. Jonathan glanced at her, a flicker of a smile tugging at his lips. "Don't mention it. Let's just get out of this mess alive." As they broke through the cloud layer into the star-speckled void of space, Jonathan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The jungle, the Krell, and the chaos of the past few hours were finally behind them. But as he set the course for the nearest neutral outpost, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Vera's amber eyes lingered on him, filled with a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something else, something deeper. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. Jonathan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just couldn't leave you there." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Perhaps the universe has plans for us, Jonathan Vega." Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's hope those plans don't involve getting us killed." The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of unknown possibilities. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined. The hum of the Nomad's engines filled the cockpit, a low, soothing vibration that thrummed through Jonathan Vega's body as he guided the ship away from Narum. The planet's green and blue surface shrank on the viewscreen, a deceptively serene image compared to the chaos he'd just left behind. Beside him, Vera Kixes sat in the co-pilot's chair, her slender frame still showing signs of exhaustion, though her amber eyes betrayed a quiet resilience. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his hands moving over the controls with practiced ease. He plotted a course toward Alio Station, the nearest neutral outpost where Vera could seek help and avoid stirring up unnecessary conflict with her people, or worse, Earth's Trade Commission. "All right," Jonathan said, breaking the silence. "We've got about 6 hours before we hit the first hyperspace waypoint. You should rest." Vera tilted her head, her silver hair shimmering under the cockpit's soft lighting. "Rest would be difficult," she admitted. Her voice, though melodic, carried the weight of everything she'd endured. "There's too much at stake." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Look, you've been through hell. You can't help anyone if you burn out. Trust me, I've been there." Her gaze lingered on him, searching his face as if trying to understand him better. "You speak with the voice of experience, Jonathan Vega." He chuckled dryly. "Yeah, well, life has a way of teaching you things whether you want to learn them or not." The ship beeped softly, the autopilot engaging as Jonathan set the final coordinates. He stood, stretching out his legs. "I'm going to check the systems and make sure everything's holding up. Try to relax, even if you can't sleep." Vera nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. As Jonathan moved toward the rear of the ship, the air between them grew heavy, the weight of unspoken questions and unresolved tension hanging in the small cabin like a storm cloud. Jonathan stepped into the engine room, letting out a low whistle as he inspected the damage report on his datapad. The Krell's stray energy blast had grazed the hull, leaving a scorch mark that wouldn't compromise the ship's structural integrity but would need repairs soon. The Nomad wasn't the newest or fastest ship in the galaxy, but she was reliable, a workhorse that had gotten him through more close calls than he cared to count. He set the datapad down and leaned against the bulkhead, running a hand through his hair. His thoughts drifted to Vera, her words replaying in his mind. Too much at stake. What had she meant by that? Was there more to her story than she was letting on? Jonathan shook his head. Of course, there was. Diplomats never revealed everything up front. It was in their nature to hold back until the right moment. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during his time in the Terran Special Forces. Still, something about her felt different. Genuine. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned to see Vera standing in the doorway, her silver hair brushing her shoulders. She had changed into one of his spare flight suits, the garment hanging loosely on her slender frame but offering more comfort than her tattered flight suit had. "You're supposed to be resting," Jonathan said, crossing his arms. She offered a faint smile. "You're supposed to be checking the systems." He gestured to the datapad. "I am." Vera stepped closer, her amber eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "I couldn't stay in the cockpit." The quiet felt oppressive. Jonathan understood that feeling all too well. He'd spent countless hours in silence during solo missions, and sometimes the weight of it could feel heavier than the loudest battlefield. "Fair enough," he said, motioning for her to join him. "Welcome to the engine room. It's not much, but it keeps us flying." She approached the engine core, her fingers brushing the cool metal casing. "Your ship is efficient," she observed. "Not elegant, but functional." Jonathan smirked. "That's one way to describe it. The Trade Commission doesn't exactly hand out luxury cruisers for recon missions." Vera's expression grew thoughtful as she traced the edge of the console. "You work for the Trade Commission, but you don't seem content with it." Jonathan arched an eyebrow. "And you got that from my engine room?" She met his gaze, her amber eyes piercing. "I got that from the way you talk about your ship, your mission. You're a man of action, Jonathan Vega. Sitting behind a desk or conducting routine surveys doesn't suit you." He let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "You're not wrong. I left the military to get away from the constant life-or-death situations. But sitting still, yeah, it's not exactly my strong suit." "Then why accept a mission like this?" Jonathan hesitated, leaning against the bulkhead. "Money, mostly. The Trade Commission pays well for solo work like this. And I guess part of me thought it would be good to get away. Clear my head." "From what?" The question hung in the air, and Jonathan wasn't sure how to answer it. He could feel Vera's eyes on him, not probing but patient, waiting. "From everything," he said finally, his voice low. "The things I've seen, the things I've done. Sometimes they don't leave much room for anything else." Vera nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I understand that more than you know." Before Jonathan could respond, the ship's alarm blared, jolting both of them. "What now?" Jonathan muttered, grabbing the datapad and heading toward the cockpit with Vera close behind. The console screen flickered to life as they entered the cockpit, displaying a red warning light and a proximity alert. Jonathan's hands flew over the controls, bringing up the external cameras. His stomach sank. A Krell hunting party had emerged from Narum's surface and was now pursuing them in a salvaged shuttle. The angular craft was primitive but functional, its weapons systems lighting up as it closed the distance. "They're not giving up, are they?" Jonathan muttered, his jaw tightening. Vera leaned over the console, her amber eyes narrowing. "They must believe you have something of value." "Great," Jonathan said dryly. "I just traded them vaccines, and now they want my ship too." The Krell shuttle fired a warning shot, the energy bolt streaking past the Nomad and rocking the small vessel with its proximity. Jonathan clenched his teeth. "All right, let's see what this bucket of bolts can do." He disengaged the autopilot and took manual control, his hands steady on the yoke. The Nomad wasn't built for combat, but she was fast and agile, and Jonathan knew how to make her dance. The Krell shuttle fired again, and Jonathan rolled the ship to the left, the energy bolt grazing the hull but causing no significant damage. "Can you operate the weapons systems?" he asked Vera, his voice calm despite the tension in the air. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. "Good. Target their engines. If we can disable them, we might have a chance to get out of this alive." Vera's fingers moved deftly over the controls, activating the Nomad's twin plasma cannons. The ship shuddered slightly as the weapons powered up, their hum filling the cockpit. Jonathan maneuvered the ship into a tight arc, lining up the Krell shuttle in their sights. Now! Vera fired, the plasma bolt streaking through space and striking the Krell shuttle's aft section. The craft jolted, its engines flickering but not failing. "They're still operational," Vera reported, her voice steady. "Not for long," Jonathan said, his eyes narrowing. The Krell shuttle fired again, but Jonathan rolled the Nomad into a barrel roll, narrowly avoiding the blast. He brought the ship around for another pass, his hands moving with a precision born of years of training. "Take the shot," he urged. Vera fired again, this time hitting the Krell shuttle's starboard engine. The craft sputtered, its movements growing erratic. "They're losing control," she said. "Good," Jonathan replied. "Let's finish this." He brought the Nomad in close, giving Vera a clear shot at the shuttle's remaining engine. She fired one last time, the plasma bolt striking true. The Krell shuttle spiraled out of control, its systems failing as it drifted into the void. Jonathan didn't wait to see what would happen next. He pushed the Nomad to full throttle, putting as much distance as possible between them and the disabled craft. The tension in the cockpit eased as the proximity alert faded, replaced by the steady hum of the ship's engines. Vera let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're an exceptional pilot, Jonathan Vega." Jonathan smirked, his hands still on the controls. "And you're not bad with a plasma cannon. We make a good team." Vera's lips curved into a small smile. "It seems the universe agrees." Jonathan glanced at her, his smirk softening. "Let's hope it stays on our side." The Nomad continued its journey, the stars stretching endlessly before them. For the moment, they were safe, but Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. The Nomad glided silently through the star-speckled void, its engines purring at a low hum. Jonathan Vega leaned back in his pilot's chair, his muscles still taut from the encounter with the Krell. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to stay alert, though the immediate danger had passed. The disabled Krell shuttle was far behind them, left adrift near Narum's orbit. Beside him, Vera Kixes sat in the co-pilot's seat, her amber eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The faint glow of distant stars reflected in her gaze, but her thoughts seemed far away. Jonathan could feel the tension radiating from her, a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. "We're clear for now," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Vera nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Jonathan. For saving me. For everything." Jonathan shrugged, his hands still resting lightly on the controls. "Just doing what needed to be done. Like I said, I couldn't leave you back there." Vera turned to him, her gaze piercing. "You've risked so much for someone you barely know. Why?" Jonathan hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He met her eyes, searching for an answer that felt honest. "I guess. I couldn't stand the idea of walking away. Leaving someone behind like that. It's not who I am." Her expression softened, and for a moment, the tension between them seemed to ease. The ship's alarm blared suddenly, shattering the fragile quiet. Jonathan's head snapped toward the console as the red warning light began to flash. "Not again," he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. "What is it?" Vera asked, her voice sharp. "Distress signal," Jonathan replied, his brow furrowing as he brought the signal up on the screen. The data scrolled rapidly, but even before he fully deciphered it, he knew what it meant. "It's Australese," Vera said, leaning closer. Her voice was quiet but urgent. Jonathan nodded grimly. "Looks like one of your ships is in trouble near the Taurus Nebula. Diplomatic vessel under attack." Vera's breath caught, her fingers gripping the edge of the console. "The Celestial Envoy," she murmured. "It must be them." Jonathan frowned. "Friends of yours?" She hesitated. "My delegation's support ship. If they're under attack, it means—" Her voice trailed off, but the fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. "It means whoever hit your team on Narum is hitting them too," Jonathan finished, his voice grim. Vera nodded. "We have to help them." Jonathan's jaw tightened. His instincts told him to stay the course for Alio's station. neutral ground where Vera could contact her people without dragging him into an interstellar incident. But something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, made the decision for him. He sighed. "All right. Buckle up. This is going to get messy." Vera's eyes widened. "You'll help?" Jonathan glanced at her, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I've come this far. Might as well go all in." She nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. The Nomad dropped out of hyperspace into the chaotic fringes of the Taurus Nebula. The view screen filled with streaks of glowing gas clouds and the distant flicker of energy weapons. At the center of the conflict was the Celestial Envoy, a sleek silver vessel shaped like a crescent moon. It was under siege from a swarm of angular black ships, pirates, judging by their makeshift design and reckless tactics. Jonathan's hands tightened on the controls as he assessed the situation. The Celestial Envoy's shields were flickering, barely holding against the onslaught. The pirate ships swarmed like wasps, firing relentlessly. "Looks like a bad day for diplomacy," Jonathan muttered. Vera leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The envoy won't last much longer without help." Jonathan nodded, his mind racing. "All right, here's the plan. We come in fast, take out as many of those pirates as we can, and give the envoy some breathing room. Think you can handle the weapons again?" Vera's lips curved into a determined smile. "Try me." Jonathan grinned. "That's the spirit." The Nomad surged forward, its engines roaring to life. Jonathan weaved the ship through the nebula's turbulent currents, closing the distance to the battle. As they approached, Vera activated the plasma cannons, the weapon systems humming with energy. The first pirate ship came into range, its black hull glinting faintly in the nebula's light. Jonathan lined up the shot, and Vera fired. The plasma bolt struck true, tearing through the pirate ship's engines. It spiraled out of control, a fiery wreck tumbling into the void. "Nice shot," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Vera didn't respond, her focus unyielding as she targeted the next ship. The Nomad twisted and turned, dodging incoming fire as Vera unleashed another volley. Another pirate ship exploded, scattering debris across the battlefield. The Celestial Envoy hailed them, the communication screen flickering to life. A silver-haired Australese captain appeared, his expression both shocked and relieved. "This is Captain Taylise of the Celestial Envoy. Identify yourself." Jonathan didn't look away from the controls. "Name's Jonathan Vega. I've got a passenger here you might recognize." Vera leaned into view. "Captain Taylise, it's me. Vera Kixes." The captain's eyes widened. "Lady Kixes, you're alive." "Thanks to Mr. Vega," she said quickly. "But we're not safe yet. What's your status?" "Our shields are failing," Taylise admitted, his voice grim. "We've sustained heavy damage, and our weapons are offline." Jonathan cursed under his breath. "Looks like it's up to us." Vera nodded. "Keep them off the envoy. I'll coordinate with the captain to stabilize their systems." Jonathan grinned. "Just don't let them blow up while we're saving the day." Vera shot him a look but didn't respond, turning her attention to the comms. Jonathan pushed the Nomad to its limits, diving into the swarm of pirate ships with precision and fury. The plasma cannons roared, tearing through one target after another. But the pirates were relentless, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm him. The Nomad shuddered as a stray energy bolt struck the aft section. Alarms blared, and Jonathan gritted his teeth. "Vera, we've got a problem back here," he called out. She turned, her expression calm but urgent. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Jonathan replied. "We need to wrap this up, or we're not going to make it out." Vera's amber eyes flicked to the view screen. The Celestial Envoy was still taking hits, its shields barely holding. The pirate ships seemed endless, more of them surging out from the shadows of the nebula. "Captain Taylise," Vera said sharply, "can you launch escape pods?" Taylise hesitated. "We can, but without cover." "We'll provide it," Jonathan cut in, his voice firm. "Get your people off that ship. Now." Tail nodded reluctantly. Understood. Launching pods. The envoy's escape pods ejected in quick succession, tiny silver orbs streaking away from the crippled ship. Jonathan shifted his focus, positioning the Nomad between the pods and the pirate fleet. "Hang on," he muttered, his hands gripping the controls tightly. The Nomad became a shield, intercepting incoming fire with precision. Vera fired the plasma cannons relentlessly, her aim unerring. One by one, the pirate ships fell, their wreckage scattering across the battlefield. But the Nomad was taking a beating. Sparks flew from the console as another bolt struck the hull, and warning lights flashed across the screen. "Vera, we can't keep this up," Jonathan shouted. She nodded, her expression grim. "We've done enough. The pods are clear." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He hit the throttle, pulling the Nomad away from the battle. The remaining pirate ships hesitated, seemingly unsure whether to pursue or retreat. As the nebula's glowing tendrils faded behind them, Vera let out a shaky breath. "We made it," she said softly. Jonathan glanced at her, his smirk tinged with exhaustion. "Barely." The comms crackled, and Captain Tailize's voice came through. "Lady Kix's, Mr. Vega, I don't know how to thank you." "Just stay alive," Jonathan replied. Vera smiled faintly. "We'll rendezvous at Alio's station. From there, we can discuss everything." As the comms went silent, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day finally catching up to him. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" he said, glancing at Vera. She tilted her head, her expression soft. "As are you, Jonathan Vega." For a moment, the cockpit was quiet, the stars stretching endlessly before them. Despite the chaos, the uncertainty, and the danger, Jonathan felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose. Whatever came next, he wasn't facing it alone.